Human nature is a complex concept that has been explored and debated by philosophers, theologians, scientists, and artists for centuries. At its core, the study of human nature seeks to understand what it means to be human, encompassing our inherent characteristics, behaviors, and the underlying motivations that drive us. Philosophy in classical Greece is the ultimate origin of the Western conception of the nature of things. According to Aristotle, the philosophical study of human nature itself originated with Socrates, who shifted the focus of philosophy from the study of the heavens to the study of human things. Although Socrates left no written works, he is renowned for his exploration of how a person should best live. In the works of Plato and Aristotle, the human soul is described as having a nature divided in a specifically human way. This division includes a rational part, which is further split into a part that is rational on its own and a spirited part that can understand reason. Other parts of the soul are home to desires or passions similar to those found in animals. Both philosophers distinguish spiritedness, thumos, from other passions, epithumia. According to this account, the proper function of the rational part of the soul is to rule over the other parts, aided by spiritedness. Consequently, the use of reason is seen as the best way to live, making philosophers the highest types of humans. This view underscores the belief that a life guided by rational thought and wisdom is the most aligned with human nature. Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, made some of the most influential statements about human nature. In his works, beyond employing a similar scheme of a divided human soul, Aristotle provided clear insights into human nature. Unlike other animals, humans possess reason or language, logos, within their soul, psyche. For Aristotle, this implies that the function, ergos, of a human is the actualization, energia, of the soul in accordance with reason. Additionally, Aristotle categorized humans in several ways. Man is a conjugal animal, which means that humans are naturally inclined to form couples in adulthood, building households, oikos. In successful cases, these households expand into clans or small villages, typically organized along patriarchal lines. However, humans naturally tend to connect these villages into larger entities, polis, which are more self-sufficient and complete. Man is a political animal, meaning that humans have an innate propensity to develop more complex communities, such as cities or towns, which include systems of lawmaking and a division of labor. These larger communities are distinct from large families and necessitate the use of human reason. Unlike villages, run by patriarchs, cities require governance that involves a broader and more sophisticated application of rational thought. Man is a mimetic animal. Humans have a profound love for using their imagination, not only for practical purposes like lawmaking and running councils, but also for creative and representational activities. Aristotle noted that people enjoy looking at accurate likenesses of things that might be painful to see in reality, such as obscene beasts or corpses. This enjoyment stems from the learning and inference process, as viewers recognize and understand what each representation is. For Aristotle, reason is not only the most distinguishing feature of humanity compared to other animals, but also represents the highest achievement humans can strive for. This idea of teleology, that humans are meant or intended to achieve their best through the use of reason, was central to Aristotle's view of human nature. While much of Aristotle's description of human nature remains influential today, the teleological perspective, which suggests that humans have a specific purpose or end goal they are meant to fulfill, has become less popular in modern times. For the Socratics, human nature, and all natures, are metaphysical concepts. Aristotle developed the standard presentation of this approach with his theory of four causes, whereby every living thing exhibits four aspects, or causes. Matter or hyle, the physical substance that makes up a thing. Form, eidos, the essential nature or structure of a thing. Effect, kinon, the source of movement or change. End, telos, the ultimate purpose or goal. For example, an oak tree is composed of plant cells, matter. It originates from an acorn, effect. It embodies the characteristics of oak trees, form, and it matures into a fully grown oak tree, end. According to Aristotle, human nature is an instance of a formal cause, where our end is to become fully actualized human beings, which includes fully actualizing the mind. Aristotle posits that the human intellect, though smallest in bulk, is the most significant part of the human psyche and should be cultivated above all else. He suggests that the cultivation of learning and intellectual growth leads to the happiest and least painful life, as the philosopher who seeks knowledge and understanding achieves the highest form of human existence. Human nature is a central question in Chinese philosophy. From the Song dynasty onward, the theory of the innate goodness of human beings became dominant in Confucianism. Mencius argued that just as water flows downward, humans naturally tend toward goodness unless their nature is corrupted by external forces. This view stands in contrast to the theory of innate evil advocated by Xuanzi, another influential Confucian thinker. According to mentioned theory, human nature contains four beginnings, duan, of morality. These are a sense of compassion. This innate feeling develops into benevolence, ren. A sense of shame and disdain. This feeling evolves into righteousness, yi. A sense of respect and courtesy. This innate respect grows into propriety, li. A sense of right and wrong. This intuitive judgment matures into wisdom, shi. The beginnings of morality are characterized by both affective motivations and intuitive judgments about what is right and wrong, deferential, respectful, or disdainful. In Mencius' view, goodness results from the development of these innate tendencies towards the virtues of benevolence, righteousness, wisdom, and propriety. These tendencies manifest as moral emotions in every human being. Reflection upon these manifestations leads to the development of virtues. This process helps individuals recognize that virtue takes precedence over personal satisfaction. However, a lack of reflection inhibits moral development. Mencius also addresses the question of why the capacity for evil is not grounded in human nature. He argues that if an individual becomes bad, it is not due to their inherent constitution, as this constitution contains the emotional predispositions that direct them towards goodness. Instead, it is a matter of injuring or not fully developing their constitution in the appropriate direction. Mencius recognizes that desires of the senses are natural predispositions distinct from the four beginnings of morality. People can be misled and led astray by their desires, if they do not engage their ethical motivations. Therefore, he places the responsibility on individuals to reflect on the manifestations of the four beginnings. This reflection is not the function of the ears and eyes, which are associated with sensual desires, but the function of the heart, which is the seat of feeling and thinking. The philosopher Wang underscores that Mencius' characterization of human nature as good means that it contains predispositions to feel and act in morally appropriate ways and to make intuitive normative judgments. With the right nurturing conditions, these predispositions provide guidance on how to appropriately balance the desires of the senses. Xuanzi understands human nature as comprising the basic faculties, capacities, and desires that people have from birth. He views these as animalistic instincts exhibited by humans before any form of education or cultivation. According to Xuanzi, these instincts include greed, idleness, and desires, which are natural and cannot be eradicated. Xuanzi argues that human nature is inherently evil and that any goodness arises from human effort and activity. He asserts that it is human nature to seek profit and sensory satisfaction, driven by inherent desires. He famously states, "Now the nature of man is evil. It must depend on teachers and laws to become correct and achieve propriety and righteousness, and then it becomes disciplined." Xuanzi's claim that human nature is bad means, according to Ivanhoe, that humans do not have an inherent conception of morality. Therefore, morality must be acquired through learning and conscious effort. Without this acquisition, human desires would lead to destructive and alienating competition. Xuanzi emphasizes that without the guidance of education, teachers, and laws, humans would naturally act on their base instincts, resulting in chaos and conflict. Legalism is based on a fundamental distrust of human nature. Adherents to this philosophy do not concern themselves with the debate over whether human goodness or badness is innate, or whether human beings possess the fundamental qualities associated with that nature. They hold that human nature is evil and believe that one should not expect people to behave morally. For instance, due to the corrupt nature of humans, legalists did not trust that officials would carry out their duties in a fair and impartial manner. They see a perpetual political struggle characterized by conflict among contending human actors and interests, where individuals are easily tempted due to their selfish nature, often at the expense of others. According to legalism, the selfishness inherent in human nature cannot be eliminated or altered by education or self-cultivation. Legalists dismiss the possibility that people can overcome their selfishness, and consider the possibility that people can be driven by moral commitment to be exceptionally rare. Legalists do not prioritize the individual morality of either rulers or the ruled in a political system. Instead, thinkers such as Han Fei emphasize the importance of clear and impersonal norms and standards, such as laws, regulations, and rules, as the foundation for maintaining order. In Han Fei's view, a core feature of human nature is that humans are selfish, but their desires are satiable. He argues that competition for external goods produces disorder during times of scarcity due to this nature. If there is no scarcity, humans may treat each other well, but this does not mean they become inherently nice. Rather, it means they do not turn to disorder when scarcity is absent. Han Fei also contends that people are motivated by their unchanging selfish core to seek whatever advantage they can gain from others, especially when they can act with impunity. Legalists posit that the inherent selfishness in human nature can be an asset rather than a threat to a state. Legalism assumes that government cannot be staffed by inherently upright and trustworthy men of service because every member of the elite, like any other member of society, will pursue their own interests. Therefore, these individuals must be employed in a way that aligns their interests with those of the state. This approach presupposes that individuals will exclusively pursue their selfish interests in a manner that benefits rather than contradicts the needs of the state. A political system based on the assumption of inherent selfishness is considered the only viable system by legalists. In contrast, a political system based on trust and respect, rather than impersonal norms and standards, brings great concern regarding an ongoing and irresolvable power struggle. Legalists propose that control is the foundation of governing, achieved through a system of reward and punishment. They view the usage of rewards and punishments as effective political controls, capitalizing on the human nature of having likes and dislikes. For instance, the legalist statesman Jean-Jacques emphasized the importance of investigating the disposition of people in terms of rewards and penalties when establishing laws. He argued that people cannot be driven to pursue agriculture or warfare if they consider these pursuits bitter or dangerous based on calculations of possible benefits. However, people can be directed toward these pursuits through the application of positive and negative incentives. On the selfishness of human nature, Han Fei remarked that those who act as ministers fear the penalties and hope to profit by the rewards. In Han Fei's view, the only realistic option is a political system that produces equivalents of Junzi, virtuous exemplars in Confucianism, but not actual Junzi. This does not imply a distinction between seeming and being good, as Han Fei does not entertain the idea that humans are inherently good. Rather, given that human nature is constituted by self-interest, he argues that humans can be behaviorally shaped to yield social order if it aligns with their self-interest to abide by norms. This alignment is most efficiently ensured if the norms are publicly and impartially enforced. Medieval conceptions of humanity were deeply influenced by two primary sources, the Bible and the classical philosophical tradition. In Scripture, two key passages served as foundational to a dynamic anthropology. Genesis 1 verse 26, which states that humanity was created in the image of God, and Wisdom 2:23, which further elaborates on this concept. These passages compelled theologians to reflect extensively on the implications of being created in God's image. Bernard of Clairvaux, a prominent medieval theologian, posited that humanity reflects the image of God through an inadmissible free will, as articulated in his work on grace and free will. However, the majority of medieval authors, following the classical philosophical tradition, understood the likeness between God and humanity as primarily based on reason. Thomas Aquinas, for instance, argued that human beings can be called imago Dei, image of God, because of their intellectual nature. According to Aquinas in his Summa Theologiae, human intellectual nature imitates God particularly in the capacity for self-knowledge and self-love. Bonaventure, another influential medieval theologian, saw all created beings as vestiges of God, but beings endowed with intelligence were considered images of God because God is present in acts of memory, intellect, and will as their source and principle. Meister Eckhart, building upon Christology and the doctrine of man as image of God, sought to transcend the traditional distinction between the Son as the image of the Father and humanity as created in the image of God. The motif of humanity as a microcosm, reflecting the universe within itself, has ancient roots but gained significant traction in the 12th century. Authors such as Bernardus Silvestris and Godfrey of St. Victor utilized this motif, which also influenced figures like Hildegard of Bingen and Honorius Augustodonensis. They developed intricate systems of correspondences between the little world, humanity, and the universe, the macrocosm. These correspondences played a substantial role not only in theological discourse but also in medieval medicine and the understanding of the four temperaments. The definition of man as a rational animal finds its origins in antiquity, but it gained renewed importance and sparked significant debates in the West after the translation of Greek and Arabic philosophical texts, particularly those of Aristotle. Aristotle's nuanced exploration of the relationship between soul and body posed challenges and inspired diverse interpretations. One influential perspective, championed by Bonaventure, embraced a dualist position that asserted humanity consists of two distinct substances, the soul and the body. According to Bonaventure, the soul acts as the mover joined to the body, implying a degree of ontological autonomy for the soul. This viewpoint resonated strongly with religious beliefs in the immortality of the soul, as the soul's independence from the body supported the idea of its survival beyond physical death. In contrast, Aristotle's hylomorphic doctrine, which views the soul as the form of the body or the act of the organic body, presented a different challenge. This perspective seemed less compatible with a straightforward thesis supporting the immortality of the soul, given its close association with the body. Thomas Aquinas navigated these complexities by integrating Aristotelian principles into Christian theology. He emphasized the unity of the human composite, arguing that the intellective soul serves as the form by which man exists as a unified being, a being in act, a body, a living thing, an animal, and a man. Aquinas accepted that the soul is the substantial form of the body, yet he also posited the soul's intellectual activity as independent of the body, suggesting its potential for existence apart from bodily functions. Aquinas sought to demonstrate the soul's capacity for separate existence by highlighting its ability to engage in intellectual activities that are not contingent on bodily functions. He argued, hence the intellectual principle, in other words the spirit, the intellect, possesses by itself an activity in which the body has no part. This line of reasoning led Aquinas to conclude that the human soul, particularly the intellect or spirit, is an incorporeal and subsistent reality, capable of existing independently of the body. By the 14th century, philosophical debates regarding the immortality of the soul had become increasingly contentious. Figures like William of Ockham and Jean Buridan challenged traditional proofs of the soul's immortality, marking a shift in intellectual discourse. However, it was in the 15th and early 16th centuries that these debates reached a peak of intensity and diversity. Marsilio Ficino's work Platonic Theology, 1474, stands out as a monumental defense of the immortality of the soul within the framework of Platonic philosophy. Ficino argued passionately for the soul's enduring existence beyond death, drawing upon Platonic doctrines of the soul's pre-existence and its eternal nature. In contrast, Pietro Pomponazzi vehemently opposed the idea, advocating a more skeptical stance that aligned with Aristotelian principles and empirical observations. In politics, Aristotle famously characterized humans as political animals. Marsilius of Padua and Dante Alighieri, among others, explored these themes extensively, linking political organization with fundamental aspects of human identity. Furthermore, the role of language emerged as a crucial element in defining human nature. Thomas Aquinas highlighted the uniqueness of human communication, asserting that it is proper to humans to use language to express thoughts. It is true that the other animals communicate their passions, roughly, as the dog expresses his anger by barking. Hence, man is much more communicative towards others than any animal whatever that we see living gregariously, like the crane, the ant, or the bee. Aquinas' observation underscored the centrality of language not only as a means of communication but also as a distinctive feature that sets humans apart from other animals. John Scotus Eriugeno's work, particularly in De Divisione Naturae, Book 4, presented an optimistic view of humanity. He posited that his substance is the notion by which he knows himself, emphasizing the intellectual and self-reflective capacities that distinguish humans from other creatures. In contrast, Lotario de Segni, who later became Pope Innocent III, offered a contrasting portrayal of human frailty and misery in his work De Miseria Conditionis Humanae. The 15th century witnessed a resurgence of interest in human dignity, exemplified by Giannozzo Manetti's celebration of human beauty and excellence in body and soul. Manetti's praise was in response to the lamentations of Pope Innocent III, reflecting a renewed appreciation for human potential and capability amidst theological reflections on human shortcomings. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, in his seminal work Oration on the Dignity of Man, articulated a profoundly elevated conception of human dignity. Pico celebrated the radical freedom of humanity, asserting that humans have the capacity to define themselves through their choices. I have given you neither a determined place, nor a face of your own, so that your place, your face, and your gifts you may will, conquer and possess by yourself. This declaration emphasized humanity's unique status in creation, endowed with the freedom to shape its own destiny and identity. Pico's anthropology, often heralded as a precursor to modern thought, did not contradict religious beliefs but rather underscored that human dignity derives from being made in the image of God, as stated in biblical teachings. Pico's eloquence and depth of thought illuminated the idea that human potential surpasses any fixed definition or limitation, expressing a profound truth that transcends conventional boundaries. In Christian theology, the conception of human nature encompasses both spiritual, biblical perspectives and natural, cosmical considerations, often framed in anti-theistic contexts. The former viewpoint emphasizes humanity's relationship with God, rooted in theological and scriptural teachings. The Bible itself does not present a singular doctrine of human nature but provides diverse theological and philosophical materials that inform different interpretations and descriptions of humanity. As originally created, the Bible portrays human nature as consisting of two essential elements: the physical body and the breath or spirit of life breathed into it by God. This union forms a living soul, signifying a complete and living person. Genesis 1 verse 27 affirms that this living person was made in the image of God. According to biblical perspective, to be human is fundamentally to bear this image of God. The exact meaning of the image of God, as described in Genesis, is not explicitly elaborated upon in the text, but scholars have derived several implications. Firstly, being created in the image of God distinguishes human nature from that of animals. Secondly, just as God has the capacity to make decisions and exercise dominion, humans, made in God's image, possess the faculties of reason, moral judgment, and the ability to exercise dominion over the earth. Another perspective is that humankind has an inherent capacity to set goals and work towards them, a characteristic reflective of divine purposefulness. Additionally, the affirmation that God denoted creation as good suggests that Adam, the first human, was originally created in a state of righteousness and moral purity. However, the biblical narrative also acknowledges humanity's capacity for moral choice and its consequences. Adam's ability to choose freely included the potential for disobedience and sin, leading to a fall from righteousness into a state of sin and moral depravity. Thus, according to the Bible, humankind's current condition is marked by a departure from the original state of moral perfection in which God created humanity. Psalm 51 verse 5 poetically expresses this understanding. For behold, I was conceived in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Jesus himself affirmed the innate sinful disposition of humanity, stating that it is natural for humans to sin. The Apostle Paul elaborates on this theological understanding in Romans 7 verse 18, where he acknowledges the presence of a sinful nature within himself. This recognition of human moral frailty is not confined to Christianity, but is a universal theme found across various religious traditions. Augustine of Hippo coined the term original sin to describe the inherent tendency to sin that is present in all human beings from birth. This doctrine, affirmed by the Catholic Church and most Protestant denominations, posits that the corruption of original sin affects every aspect of human being, including reason, will, appetites, and impulses. This condition is sometimes described as total depravity, not implying that humans are as morally corrupt as they could possibly be, but rather that every part of human nature is tainted by sin. However, God's mercy and grace offer a pathway to regeneration, a radical transformation and renewal of human nature. This concept of regeneration is central to Christianity, which teaches that through Christ, individuals can experience a profound change that restores them to God's intended state. The process of regeneration, as understood in Christian theology, involves a complete transformation of individuals. The goal is for fallen humanity to be conformed to or transformed into the image of Christ, who is seen as the perfect image of God, 2 Corinthians 4 verse 4. This transformation is not merely superficial but entails a renewal at the core of one's being, a spiritual and moral renewal that affects thoughts, desires, and actions. Various passages illustrate the biblical portrayal of regenerated human nature and the behavioral changes that accompany it. Romans 12 verse 2, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing and perfect will." Colossians 3 verses 9 to 10, "Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its Creator." Galatians 5 verses 20 to 23, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law." Philippians 2 verse 4, "Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." Although this new realism applied to the study of human life from the beginning, for example, in Machiavelli's works, the definitive argument for the final rejection of Aristotle was associated especially with Francis Bacon. Bacon sometimes wrote as if he accepted the traditional four causes. It is a correct position that true knowledge is knowledge by causes. And causes again are not improperly distributed into four kinds: the material, the formal, the efficient, and the final. But he adapted these terms and rejected one of the three. But of these the final cause rather corrupts than advances the sciences, except such as have to do with human action. The discovery of the formal is despaired of. The efficient and the material, as they are investigated and received, that is, as remote causes, without reference to the latent process leading to the form, are but slight and superficial, and contribute little, if anything, to true and active science. This line of thinking continued with René Descartes, whose new approach returned philosophy or science to its pre-Socratic focus upon non-human things. Thomas Hobbes, then Giambattista Vico, and David Hume all claimed to be the first to properly use a modern Baconian scientific approach to human things. Hobbes famously followed Descartes in describing humanity as matter in motion, just like machines. He also very influentially described man's natural state, without science and artifice, as one where life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Following him, John Locke's philosophy of empiricism saw human nature as a tabula rasa. In this view, the mind is at birth a blank slate without rules, so data are added, and rules for processing them are formed solely by our sensory experiences. In contrast to the traditional Aristotelian view, Bacon and his successors sought to ground knowledge in empirical observation and experiment, rather than abstract reasoning about essences and final causes. Descartes emphasized skepticism and the method of doubt as a path to secure knowledge, leading to his famous assertion cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, which prioritized self-awareness and consciousness over speculative metaphysics. Hobbes, influenced by the mechanistic philosophy of Descartes, portrayed human behavior as determined by physical laws and driven by self-interest and survival instincts. His depiction of the state of nature as chaotic and violent underscored the necessity for a strong central authority to maintain social order and prevent conflict. Jean-Jacques Rousseau pushed the approach of Hobbes to an extreme and criticized it at the same time. He was a contemporary and acquaintance of Hume, writing before the French Revolution and long before Darwin and Freud. He shocked Western civilization with his second discourse by proposing that humans had once been solitary animals, without reason or language or communities, and had developed these things due to accidents of prehistory. This proposal was also less famously made by Giambattista Vico. In other words, Rousseau argued that human nature was not only not fixed, but not even approximately fixed compared to what had been assumed before him. Humans are political and rational, and have language now, but originally they had none of these things. This in turn implied that living under the management of human reason might not be a happy way to live at all, and perhaps there is no ideal way to live. Rousseau is also unusual in the extent to which he took the approach of Hobbes, asserting that primitive humans were not even naturally social. A civilized human is therefore not only imbalanced and unhappy because of the mismatch between civilized life and human nature, but unlike Hobbes, Rousseau also became well known for the suggestion that primitive humans had been happier, noble savages. Rousseau's conception of human nature has been seen as the origin of many intellectual and political developments of the 19th and 20th centuries. He was an important influence upon Kant, Hegel, and Marx, and the development of German idealism, historicism, and romanticism. What human nature did entail, according to Rousseau and the other modernists of the 17th and 18th centuries, were animal-like passions that led humanity to develop language and reasoning, and more complex communities, or communities of any kind, according to Rousseau. Rousseau's critique of the prevailing views on human nature was groundbreaking because it challenged the notion of a fixed human essence, and instead posited a dynamic and evolving conception. His idea that humans were originally solitary and primitive, gradually evolving complex faculties like reason and language, struck at the core of traditional philosophical and theological doctrines that held humans as fundamentally rational and social beings from the beginning. This view of a changing and adaptable human nature set the stage for later thinkers to explore the impact of societal structures and cultural norms on individual identity and behavior. Rousseau's influence on subsequent philosophical and political thought cannot be overstated. His emphasis on the role of natural impulses and the corrupting influence of civilization laid the groundwork for critiques of modernity and industrialization in the 19th and 20th centuries. In contrast to Rousseau, David Hume was a critic of the oversimplifying and systematic approach of Hobbes, Rousseau, and some others whereby, for example, all human nature is assumed to be driven by variations of selfishness. Influenced by Hutcheson and Shaftesbury, he argued against oversimplification. On the one hand, he accepted that, for many political and economic subjects, people could be assumed to be driven by such simple selfishness, and he also wrote of some of the more social aspects of human nature as something which could be destroyed, for example if people did not associate in just societies. On the other hand, he rejected what he called the paradox of the skeptics, saying that no politician could have invented words like honorable and shameful, lovely and odious, noble and despicable, unless there was not some natural original constitution of the mind. Hume, like Rousseau, was controversial in his own time for his modernist approach, following the example of Bacon and Hobbes, of avoiding consideration of metaphysical explanations for any type of cause and effect. He was accused of being an atheist. He wrote, "We needn't push our researches so far as to ask why do we have humanity, i.e. a fellow feeling with others? It's enough that we experience this as a force in human nature. Our examination of causes must stop somewhere." After Rousseau and Hume, the nature of philosophy and science changed, branching into different disciplines and approaches, and the study of human nature changed accordingly. Rousseau's proposal that human nature is malleable became a major influence upon international revolutionary movements of various kinds, while Hume's approach has been more typical in Anglo-Saxon countries, including the United States. According to Edward Macquarie, the concept of human nature is an outgrowth of folk biology and in particular, the concept of folk essentialism, the tendency of ordinary people to ascribe essences to kinds. Macquarie argues that while the idea that humans have an essence is a very old idea, the idea that all humans have a unified human nature is relatively modern. For a long time, people thought of humans as us versus them, and thus did not think of human beings as a unified kind. The concept of human nature remains a contentious topic in contemporary philosophy, particularly within the field of philosophy of biology, which is a subfield of the philosophy of science. Critics such as David L. Hull, Michael Giselin, and David Buller argue vehemently against the concept, claiming it is fundamentally incompatible with modern evolutionary biology. In contrast, proponents of the concept of human nature argue that it can still be a scientifically respectable and meaningful concept if defined carefully. David L. Hull's critique challenges traditional conceptions of human nature as a set of intrinsic, universal traits unique to Homo sapiens. He argues that such essential sameness among humans is both temporary and contingent in biological terms. Hull's reasoning is grounded in contemporary evolutionary biology, which emphasizes variation within and between species as a natural consequence of evolutionary processes. Hull contends that biological species are defined not by specific intrinsic properties shared universally among their members, but rather by relational criteria such as genealogical or interbreeding relationships. According to him, these relational criteria, rather than any essential traits, determine species membership. Therefore, there can be no fixed set of intrinsic properties that definitively define what it means to be human. From a philosophical standpoint, Hull's argument has significant implications for the concept of human rights. Traditionally, the idea of human rights has been rooted in the belief that all human beings share certain intrinsic characteristics that warrant equal moral consideration. However, if Hull's critique holds, this biological foundation for human rights would be called into question. Nevertheless, Hull himself suggests that the moral justification for human rights need not rely solely on a shared biological nature. Instead, he argues that people can choose to uphold human rights based on ethical, social, or legal grounds, independent of any biological essentialism. In this view, the commitment to human rights can be justified through reasoned argumentation and social consensus, rather than through a fixed conception of human nature. In response to critiques like David L. Hull's, several contemporary philosophers have sought to defend the concept of human nature within the framework of modern evolutionary biology. One approach taken by defenders of human nature is to propose non-essentialist interpretations. Non-essentialist views acknowledge the role of genetic, environmental, and cultural factors in shaping human characteristics without positing a static essence. Moreover, some philosophers argue for a relational understanding of essences. According to this view, essences are defined not by intrinsic properties shared universally among individuals but by relational criteria such as genealogical, ecological, or phylogenetic relationships. Philosopher of science Edouard Macquarie's distinction between essentialist and nomological notions of human nature provides a nuanced framework for understanding the concept in light of modern evolutionary biology. While he acknowledges that the essentialist notion of human nature, defining it as a set of intrinsic, necessary, and sufficient properties, is problematic and incompatible with contemporary biological understandings, Macquarie proposes an alternative approach with his nomological notion. According to Macquarie, human nature in the nomological sense refers to the set of properties that humans tend to possess as a result of the evolutionary history of their species. These properties do not define what it means to be a member of Homo sapiens in a strict, essentialist sense. Instead, they are characteristics that are typical among humans due to evolutionary processes, even if they are not universal or unique to humans. Key features of human nature in the nomological sense include traits like bipedalism, linguistic capacity, tendencies towards biparental investment in children, and instinctual fear responses to certain stimuli. These traits are understood not as defining humanity but as common tendencies shaped by evolutionary pressures over time. Importantly, these traits are subject to change and variation across populations and historical periods, reflecting the dynamic nature of evolutionary processes. Macquarie argues that adopting the nomological notion of human nature helps to explain why there are both significant cultural diversity and underlying commonalities across human societies. While cultures vary widely in their customs, beliefs, and practices, many fundamental aspects of human behavior and social organization, such as kinship systems, exhibit common themes or patterns. These commonalities can be understood as expressions of shared tendencies rooted in human evolutionary history rather than fixed, essentialist traits. In this view, human nature becomes a concept that facilitates understanding and explaining human universals while accommodating diversity. Philosopher Edouard Macquarie's nomological account of human nature has been subjected to several criticisms, highlighting potential limitations and challenges in its application to scientific and philosophical discourse. One prominent critique is that the nomological notion of human nature is perceived as a watered-down concept that fails to fulfill certain essential roles traditionally associated with the concept. Critics argue that by defining human nature in terms of properties that are merely common or typical among humans due to evolutionary processes, Macary's framework does not adequately distinguish humans from other animals, nor does it capture what it truly means to be human. This criticism underscores a concern that the nomological account lacks specificity and fails to provide a clear delineation of human uniqueness. Macary, in response to such critiques, defends the nomological concept by emphasizing its utility in making scientific and psychological generalizations about human beings. He argues that despite not defining humanity in a strict essentialist sense, the nomological account still serves to identify shared traits and behaviors among humans that can be explained within an evolutionary framework. However, another critique posits that the nomological account risks broadening the concept of human nature to encompass virtually all human traits, whether they are evolutionarily determined or not. This raises the concern that the distinction between traits rooted in evolution, ultimate explanations, and those influenced by culture or individual experience, proximate explanations, becomes blurred. For instance, while traits like bipedalism or fear reactions may clearly result from evolutionary pressures, beliefs or behaviors influenced by cultural practices or personal experiences may not fit neatly into the nomological framework. Philosopher Richard Samuels further criticizes Macary's nomological account by arguing that it fails to fulfill the causal explanatory function expected of a robust concept of human nature. Samuels contends that by focusing on superficial and covarying properties, the nomological approach may overlook deeper causal mechanisms underlying human behaviors and characteristics. Grant Ramsey extends the critique by arguing that Macary's emphasis on universal or near-universal traits overlooks the importance of idiosyncratic and particular human characteristics that may vary across individuals or cultures. Ramsey suggests that understanding human nature should not be restricted to traits shared by the majority, but should also encompass diverse and unique features that contribute to the richness of human experience. Ramsey criticizes Macary's adoption of the innate-acquired dichotomy, arguing that human properties often result from complex interactions between genetic predispositions and environmental influences throughout an individual's life. Richard Samuels' causal essentialist view proposes a redefinition of human nature centered on causal mechanisms, processes, and structures that underlie and explain the superficial properties associated with humanity. Unlike traditional essentialist views that seek to define human nature based on intrinsic and universal characteristics, Samuel's approach focuses on identifying the core cognitive and psychological mechanisms that are empirically discoverable and reliably associated with human beings. One of the central tenets of Samuel's causal essentialism is its emphasis on the causal relationships between underlying mechanisms and observable behaviors or traits. For example, while the belief that water is wet is universally shared among humans, Samuels argues that this belief itself is not a significant aspect of human nature. Instead, what is essential are the cognitive processes that lead humans to perceive and categorize water as wet. This distinction shifts the focus from surface-level traits to the deeper causal mechanisms that generate these traits across human populations. In this regard, Samuel's view of human nature is both causal and essentialist. It is causal because it seeks to explain the superficial properties associated with humanity by referencing the underlying cognitive, psychological, and biological mechanisms that produce these properties. It is essentialist insofar as it identifies a core set of empirically discoverable mechanisms that constitute human nature, rather than defining it by specific observable traits. Samuels argues that his causal essentialist approach overcomes several objections raised against traditional essentialist views of human nature within the biological sciences. For instance, by focusing on mechanisms rather than superficial traits, Samuels contends that his approach can fulfill important theoretical roles attributed to human nature, such as organizing scientific inquiry, providing causal explanations for human behaviors, and identifying invariant features that persist across diverse human populations. Samuels contrasts his view with Edward Macary's nomological conception of human nature. While Macary's framework identifies common or typical traits shared among humans as a result of evolutionary processes, Samuels aims to restore the causal explanatory function by highlighting the mechanisms underlying these traits. For instance, linguistic behavior itself may not be considered part of human nature on Samuel's view, but the cognitive mechanisms that enable language acquisition and use could be essential components. However, Samuels acknowledges that his causal essentialist view may not fulfill the taxonomic role of human nature, which traditionally involves defining what it means to be human. He argues that no conception of human nature could fully satisfy this role without facing objections from evolutionary biologists who emphasize variation and context dependence in biological traits. Grant Ramsey's life history trait cluster account provides an alternative perspective. Each person's life history is shaped by a unique combination of traits and experiences, reflecting the causal mechanisms and constraints operating within their genetic and environmental contexts. On the other hand, human nature, as Ramsey conceptualizes it, refers to the aggregate pattern of trait clusters across all possible human life histories. This perspective acknowledges the variability and contingency inherent in human experiences, recognizing that human nature is not defined by fixed, universal traits, but by the diverse patterns of traits that emerge across different individuals and contexts. Ramsey employs conditional statements to capture these trait patterns, such as if female, you develop ovaries, or if male, you develop testes. While these statements are not universally true for all humans, they hold significance within Ramsey's framework if they exhibit both pervasiveness, which means they apply to a large subset of individuals, and robustness, which means they reliably lead from antecedent to consequent. By focusing on the causal explanations behind trait distributions rather than on static definitions of human nature, Ramsey seeks to provide a nuanced understanding that accommodates the complexity and variability of human experiences. Critically, Ramsey's account challenges essentialist notions of human nature by emphasizing the dynamic and contingent nature of trait distributions across different individuals and populations. This perspective aligns with contemporary insights from evolutionary biology and developmental psychology, which highlight the role of interaction between genes and environment in shaping human behavior and characteristics. The contemporary debate surrounding human enhancement technologies, often framed as a clash between bioconservatives and transhumanists, hinges significantly on differing conceptions of human nature and its implications for ethics and societal progress. Transhumanists advocate for the view that current human nature is not fixed but rather improvable through the application of science and rational methods. They envision a future where advancements in technology could enhance human capabilities beyond their current biological limitations. In contrast, bioconservatives express deep concerns about the potential consequences of such enhancements, arguing that the costs may outweigh the benefits. They see human enhancement technologies as posing a threat to what they perceive as intrinsic aspects of human nature, including human dignity, freedom, and moral agency. For bioconservatives like Jürgen Habermas, Leon Kass, Francis Fukuyama, and Bill McKibben, human dignity is inherently tied to the natural condition of being human, and they fear that altering this condition could lead to dehumanization or undermine the foundations of ethical reasoning and societal norms. Alan Buchanan, in his exploration of the ethics surrounding human enhancement, identifies two primary concerns raised by bioconservatives. First, there is apprehension that enhancement technologies could potentially alter or even destroy aspects of human nature itself. According to this view, if human nature is fundamentally changed through enhancements, it may become difficult or impossible to determine what constitutes the good life or moral principles, as these are perceived to be grounded in our existing human nature. Secondly, bioconservatives argue that any alteration to human nature could jeopardize human dignity, which they view as a unique characteristic intrinsic to human beings. They fear that pursuing enhancements could lead to scenarios where some individuals, either enhanced or unenhanced, are marginalized or devalued, disrupting societal harmony and moral cohesion. Bioconservatives also express concerns about the potential consequences for both enhanced individuals and society as a whole. They worry that the pursuit of becoming post-humans could create divisions between those who can afford enhancements and those who cannot, exacerbating existing inequalities. Moreover, There are ethical dilemmas regarding the long-term effects of enhancements on individual well-being and societal stability. Jürgen Habermas's critique against genetic modification, which he terms as eugenic programming, centers on two primary concerns: the ethical freedom of individuals subjected to genetic modification and the potential threat to the viability of liberal democracy. Firstly, Habermas argues that genetic programming infringes upon the ethical freedom of individuals. The process of genetically modifying unborn children to possess desirable traits, capabilities, or dispositions limits their autonomy and freedom to shape their own lives. By predetermining certain aspects of a person's identity before birth, genetic programming denies individuals the opportunity to be the sole authors of their existence. This interference, according to Habermas, introduces a profound alienation where individuals may struggle to identify with a self that was shaped by external agents rather than by their own choices. This existential contingency, imposed by factors beyond one's control, undermines the notion of moral agency by diminishing the individual's ability to freely and independently make ethical judgments. Secondly, Habermas posits that genetic programming poses a significant threat to the foundation of liberal democracy. Central to liberal democracy is the principle of symmetrical and independent mutual recognition among free, equal, and autonomous persons. Genetic programming, by subjecting children to predetermined traits selected by their parents, perpetuates a relationship of permanent dependence. This dependency erodes the conditions necessary for individuals to perceive themselves as equal citizens within a legal and political community. Habermas argues that such modifications fundamentally alter human relationships by introducing inequalities that compromise the autonomous agency of future generations. Consequently, the integrity of liberal democracy, which relies on the premise of individuals freely engaging as equal citizens, is jeopardized. Grant Ramsey, whose theory we examined earlier, responds to the arguments put forth by Alan Buchanan and Tim Luens, asserting that his life history trait cluster account offers a framework where the concept of human nature can indeed inform debates about human enhancement. In response to Buchanan's argument that changing bad characteristics of human nature does not necessarily affect the good ones, Ramsey posits that his framework allows for a nuanced exploration of which traits contribute positively or negatively to human flourishing. By identifying and analyzing trait clusters across diverse life histories, Ramsey suggests that we can better evaluate the potential effects of enhancement technologies on human well-being. Ramsey challenges Luens' assertion that scientific notions of human nature offer no ethical guidance. He argues that his account provides a conceptual basis for understanding how enhancements might align with or diverge from the patterns of human nature. Transhumanists vigorously criticize appeals to nature as justifications for resisting enhancement technologies, arguing that such appeals often fall prey to the naturalistic fallacy. Coined by G. E. Moore in 1903, the naturalistic fallacy refers to the erroneous belief that certain capacities or traits are inherently morally good simply because they are natural. Nick Bostrom, a prominent advocate of transhumanism, dismisses the idea of preserving human nature without question, suggesting that if Mother Nature were held accountable as a parent, she might be charged with child abuse and murder. This provocative statement challenges the notion that nature should be revered or protected without critical examination. Similarly, bioethicist Arthur Caplan counters naturalistic objections to life extension technologies by pointing out that the process of aging itself is not necessarily intrinsic to human nature. He argues that aging, with its stochastic or chance-like characteristics, can be seen as unnatural in the sense that it is not an essential or inevitable part of being human. Therefore, Caplan contends, there is no inherent moral wrongdoing in attempting to reverse or cure aging through scientific interventions. Caplan's argument aligns with transhumanist views that emphasize the potential benefits of enhancing human capacities and extending human lifespan. By challenging the sanctity of natural processes and invoking the concept of the naturalistic fallacy, proponents of enhancement technologies advocate for a more critical and rational approach to evaluating the ethical implications of altering human biology. In my personal opinion, transhumanism can offer significant benefits, but if taken to extremes, it can have detrimental effects. Nature operates as it does for specific reasons, and everything within it has its place and purpose. Transhumanism can be beneficial in scenarios such as restoring lost limbs or enhancing the quality of life for individuals who are almost completely paralyzed due to accidents. Advanced technologies can create artificial limbs or even entire bodies that allow these individuals to regain functionality, effectively improving their lives. However, when transhumanism starts to aim for objectives like immortality, extending lifespans to 1,000 years, or creating genetically modified children, it raises serious concerns. If a child is genetically modified, it brings up the question of parenthood. To what extent can we modify a child's genes before the influence of artificial genes surpasses that of the biological parents? Shared genes are a fundamental aspect of the parent-child relationship. If a child is modified to such an extent that their genetic makeup differs significantly from their parents, can we still consider the biological parents to be the child's true parents? This raises profound ethical and philosophical questions about identity, parenthood, and the essence of being human. While transhumanism holds the promise of remarkable advancements, it is crucial to approach it with caution and consider the potential implications of pushing these technologies too far. Instinctual behavior, characterized by inherent inclinations towards particular complex behaviors, is observable in humans. Emotions such as fear are considered part of human nature, rooted in evolutionary adaptations to ensure survival. However, it's important to note that these instincts are not fixed and can exhibit malleability due to factors such as neuroplasticity. Studies have shown that certain fears, like the congenital fear of snakes and spiders, can manifest in infants as young as 6 months old. This early manifestation suggests an innate predisposition, likely developed through evolutionary pressures to avoid potential dangers in the environment. Another example of instinctual behavior is seen in the infant cry, which serves as a crucial survival mechanism during the vulnerable period of infancy. This cry elicits responses, particularly from caregivers, driven by what is commonly referred to as maternal instinct. Studies utilizing functional MRI have provided insights into the neurological mechanisms underlying this instinct, revealing specific brain activations in response to infant distress signals. Beyond individual instincts, there are also collective instincts observed in human behavior. For instance, the herd instinct, observed in both human children and chimpanzee cubs, plays a role in social cohesion and group behavior. Interestingly, this instinct appears to be absent or less pronounced in young orangutans, highlighting variations in instinctual behaviors across species. Further, humans exhibit instincts related to self-preservation and health protection. Squeamishness and disgust, for example, are evolutionary instincts developed to safeguard the body against potential infections and diseases. These reactions serve as adaptive responses to stimuli that could pose health risks, such as contaminated food or bodily fluids. As highly social creatures, humans tend to live in large, intricate social groups, which can be categorized based on income, wealth, power, reputation, and other factors. The structure of social stratification and the degree of social mobility varies, particularly between modern and traditional societies. Human groups can range in size from families to entire nations. The earliest forms of human social organization are believed to have been hunter-gatherer band societies. As social beings, humans have a strong need to adapt to their societal environments, and failing to do so often leads to suffering. However, this strong need for adaptation also has a downside, manifesting as herd mentality. Often people think, it's better to adapt even if we're wrong, so we can all be wrong together. Being a black sheep is much worse. This mindset underscores the idea that the need to belong to society can frequently outweigh the need to do what is right. In my opinion, her behavior is one of the most pronounced features of human nature. The philosophers Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche were among the first to criticize what they referred to as the crowd, Kierkegaard, and herd morality and the herd instinct, Nietzsche, in human society. Their critiques highlighted the tendency of individuals to conform to the behaviors and beliefs of the majority, often at the expense of their own individuality and critical thinking. Modern psychological and economic research has identified herd behavior in humans to explain the phenomenon of large numbers of people acting in the same way at the same time. This concept is crucial for understanding various social phenomena, including market trends, political movements, and social media virality. Swarm theory, observed in non-human societies such as ant colonies and bee swarms, is a related concept being explored in the context of human society. This theory examines how individuals within a group can act in concert without centralized control, leading to complex and adaptive group behaviors. Benign herding behaviors may occur frequently in everyday decisions based on learning from the information of others, as when a person on the street decides which of two restaurants to dine in. Suppose that both look appealing, but both are empty because it is early evening, so at random, this person chooses restaurant A. Soon a couple walks down the same street in search of a place to eat. They see that restaurant A has customers while B is empty, and choose A on the assumption that having customers makes it the better choice. Because other passers-by do the same thing into the evening, restaurant A does more business that night than B. This phenomenon is also referred to as an information cascade. Information cascades illustrate how individual decisions, based on the observations of others, can lead to collective behaviors that may not necessarily reflect the underlying quality or value of a choice. In this context, the initial random choice of one person can significantly influence the decisions of many others, creating a self-reinforcing pattern. These benign herding behaviors are common in various aspects of daily life, including consumer choices, financial markets, and online behavior. However, not all herding behaviors are benign. Crowds that gather on behalf of a grievance can involve herding behavior that turns violent, particularly when confronted by an opposing ethnic or racial group. Historical examples such as the Los Angeles riots of 1992, the New York draft riots, and the Tulsa race riot are notorious in U.S. history. These events often escalate from peaceful protests or grievances into widespread violence and destruction, fueled by the dynamics of crowd psychology. The idea of a group mind or mob behavior was put forward by French social psychologists Gabriel Tarde and Gustave Le Bon. Tarde and Le Bon argued that individuals in a crowd lose their personal identities and become part of a collective mind, which can lead to irrational and often extreme behavior. Le Bon, in particular, in his work The Crowd, a study of the popular mind, 1895, suggested that crowds are guided by a collective unconscious and are capable of acting in ways that individuals within the crowd might not typically act on their own. According to Le Bon, the anonymity of being part of a crowd diminishes personal responsibility and heightens emotional responses, leading to actions driven by the collective sentiment rather than individual rationality. Sheeple, a portmanteau of sheep and people, is a derogatory term that highlights the passive herd behavior of people easily controlled by a governing power or market fads, likening them to sheep, a herd animal that is easily led about. The term is used to describe those who voluntarily acquiesce to a suggestion without any significant critical analysis or research, largely due to the majority of a population having a similar mindset. Word Spy defines it as people who are meek, easily persuaded, and tend to follow the crowd, sheep plus people. Merriam-Webster defines the term as people who are docile, compliant, or easily influenced, people likened to sheep. The term can also be used for those who seem inordinately tolerant, or welcoming, of widespread policies. In a column entitled The Nation of Sheeple, columnist Walter E. Williams writes, Americans sheepishly accepted all sorts of transportation security administration nonsense. In the name of security, we've allowed fingernail clippers, eyeglass screwdrivers, and toy soldiers to be taken from us prior to boarding a plane. Currency crises tend to display herding behavior when foreign and domestic investors convert a government's currency into physical assets, like gold, or foreign currencies upon realizing that the government is unable to repay its debts. This is called a speculative attack, and it tends to cause moderate inflation in the short term. When consumers notice that the inflation of necessary commodities is increasing, they begin to stockpile and hoard goods, which accelerates the rate of inflation even faster. This ultimately crashes the currency and can likely lead to civil unrest. Large stock market trends often begin and end with periods of frenzied buying, bubbles, or selling crashes. Many observers cite these episodes as clear examples of herding behavior that is irrational and driven by emotion, greed in the bubbles, fear in the crashes. Individual investors join the crowd of others in a rush to get in or out of the market. Communications technologies have significantly contributed to the proliferation of consumer choice and the power of crowds. With the advent of the Internet and social media platforms, consumers now have unprecedented access to opinions and information from both opinion leaders and peers. These platforms, largely driven by user-generated content, equip consumers with various tools to aid in their decision-making processes. Popularity is often perceived as a marker of better quality, leading consumers to rely heavily on the opinions of others to guide their choices toward products and brands that align with both their preconceptions and the decisions of their peer groups. In examining the influence of reference groups on consumer behavior, Lessig and Park's study from 1977 revealed that different groups encourage distinct purchasing behaviors. For example, students tended to influence each other towards buying beer, hamburgers, and cigarettes, while housewives influenced each other towards purchasing furniture and detergent. Despite the age of this study, its findings remain relevant in today's society, particularly when considering the impact of social influence on consumer behavior. A more recent study by Burke, Lakin, Lee, and Zhang in 2014 explored social influence on shopper behavior and found that shoppers are significantly influenced by direct interactions with companions. As group size increases, herd behavior becomes more pronounced. The study observed that discussions generating excitement and interest have a greater impact on touch frequency and purchase likelihood. In a Midwestern American shopping outlet, potential customers preferred stores with moderate levels of traffic, suggesting that the presence of others not only provides company but also serves as a behavioral model for making purchase decisions. Social media has emerged as a powerful tool in perpetuating herd behavior. The vast amount of user-generated content on these platforms allows opinion leaders to influence purchase decisions significantly. Recommendations from peers and evidence of positive online experiences help consumers make informed purchasing decisions. Ganawan and Horn's 2015 study concluded that social influence is crucial in shaping attitudes toward brands, which in turn leads to purchase intention. Influencers, by forming norms that their peers follow, play a pivotal role in driving consumer behavior. Targeting extroverted personalities, who are more engaged on consumer platforms, can further enhance the spread of word-of-mouth information. Brands have increasingly recognized the importance of brand ambassadors and influencers in leveraging herd behavior to drive sales and profits. The socio-economic environment significantly influences human brain development and behavior. It has been argued that Homo sapiens, by its nature, tends towards unsustainability, viewing it as an inevitable emergent property if left unaltered. Conversely, others contend that human nature itself is not inherently unsustainable but is deeply intertwined with and influenced by the socio-economic systems in which humans operate. This perspective suggests that the contemporary socio-economic macro-system plays a pivotal role in shaping human activities. Research has highlighted the consequences of what has been termed a poor fit between inherited human natures and the constructed environments of organized society. This mismatch underscores the importance of designing cultural narratives that explicitly consider the constraints of living on a finite planet, potentially overriding outdated innate tendencies. Human nature, which varies across individuals and over time, is not static and may be intentionally altered to some extent in the future. It is a critical factor influencing how, when, and why human activities are conducted. The contemporary socioeconomic structures and collective decision-making mechanisms shape the expression of human nature, influencing innate tendencies such as the drive for survival, well-being, respect, and status. These factors contribute to the diversity in product designs, types of work, public infrastructure, and the distribution and prevalence of each. Similar to the nature versus nurture debate, which examines whether human behavior is predominantly influenced by genetics or environmental factors, scientific research on human nature's malleability by systemic structures remains inconclusive. Questions persist about the extent to which these structures can and should be purposefully altered on a global scale, and the implications of such interventions. In conclusion, as we have examined throughout history, human nature is constantly evolving. Today, we possess options that could significantly impact ourselves and the world around us in a very short time. It is crucial to approach these new capabilities with caution and responsibility. Only time will tell what the future holds. Thank you for watching.